The crisis in the Middle East is no longer moving in a straight line. What began as a conflict centered on strikes, retaliation, and regional signaling is now expanding into something much larger, militarily, politically, and strategically. In just a short period of time, three major developments have come together at once. First, the United States has reportedly ordered the deployment of the commander of the 82nd Airborne Division and members of his headquarters staff to the Middle East, signaling that more ground-linked options may now be under consideration. Second, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates are edging closer to direct involvement in the conflict after repeated attacks and growing frustration with Iran. And third, Iran's own missile activity is raising concerns far beyond the Gulf, especially after its launch toward Diego Garcia suggested a reach that could threaten targets much farther away than many expected. Put those three developments together, and the picture becomes much clearer. This is no longer just a regional exchange of strikes. This is a widening contest over deterrence, access, security, oil, and the future balance of power in the Middle East. Let's start with the U.S. military posture. The reported movement involving the 82nd Airborne is one of the clearest indicators yet that Washington wants options beyond the air campaign already underway. That does not automatically mean a ground invasion is imminent, but it does mean the Pentagon is thinking about scenarios where command structure, rapid deployment capability, and follow-on force potential could become necessary. The 82nd Airborne is not symbolic. Its name alone sends a message. It represents speed, readiness, and the ability to move quickly into unstable environments when the White House wants maximum flexibility. And when you hear that airborne leadership is deploying while Marines are also moving into theater, the implication is that U.S. planners are building a layered presence that can support deterrence, protection, evacuation, and possibly more targeted operations if events demand it. That matters because the conflict is not calming down. If anything, it is becoming more complex. Iran has continued retaliatory action across the region, and Gulf states are feeling the pressure directly. Saudi Arabia and the UAE, in particular, now appear to be much closer to crossing a line they had long tried to avoid. For years, these states have balanced security concerns with strategic caution. They understand the danger Iran poses, but they also understand the cost of full confrontation. Now that balance may be shifting. Why? Because repeated missile and drone attacks change the calculation. When strikes hit inside or near your territory, when infrastructure is threatened, when civilian and defense personnel are harmed, and when your economy and security environment are being destabilized, neutrality becomes harder to sustain. That is why reports suggesting Saudi Arabia and the UAE are edging closer to joining the fight are so important. If that shift becomes real, the war changes dramatically. It becomes broader, more regional, and harder to contain. And this is happening while President Trump continues to say talks with Iran are underway. That is the contradiction at the center of the moment. On one side, military buildup. On the other, diplomatic claims. Trump has suggested that Iran wants peace and that progress is possible, while Iran has often publicly denied meaningful negotiations. At the same time, reports indicate that indirect channels may be active through countries like Egypt, Pakistan, Turkey, and others trying to mediate. That tells us two things. First, nobody wants to appear weak publicly. Second, despite the rhetoric, everyone involved understands the stakes are becoming enormous. Because if this conflict keeps expanding, it will not remain only about military targets. It will be about oil flow, insurance risk, shipping security, regional alliances, and global economic shock. And nowhere is that more obvious than in the Strait of Hormuz. The strait remains the center of gravity in this entire crisis. It is one of the world's most important energy choke points. If it remains under threat, oil prices stay elevated, global shipping absorbs risk, and every country dependent on energy imports starts to feel the pressure. This is why India and other powers have emphasized de-escalation and secure access through Hormuz. The entire world has a stake in what happens there. But while diplomacy struggles, the military facts keep changing, and one of the biggest changes may be Iran's missile reach. When Iran launched 2 missiles toward Diego Garcia, it sent a signal that went beyond the immediate battlefield. The missiles reportedly missed, But the real impact was strategic, not tactical. It showed that Iran was willing to operationally use longer-range missile capability in a way that challenges earlier assumptions about its limits. This matters because it expands the threat map. It suggests Iran may be able to reach targets far outside its near neighborhood. That means planners in Europe, the Gulf, and beyond now have to think differently. In practical terms, if Tehran can reach farther, then European cities and distant military facilities become part of the strategic equation. That is a major escalation in perception alone. It also raises questions about the credibility of previous Iranian claims that it had intentionally limited missile ranges below a certain threshold. If those claims no longer hold, then Washington's emphasis on destroying Iran's ballistic missile arsenal and production capability becomes even more central. That appears to be one of the main objectives of Operation Epic Fury. The campaign is not only about punishing Iran in the short term, it is about reshaping the long-term threat environment. And that is why targets like missile infrastructure, vessels, command systems, and possibly key economic nodes matter so much. This brings us to another strategic point in the conflict: Karg Island. Karg Island is a small location with outsized importance. It handles a massive share of Iran's crude exports. That makes it one of the most obvious pressure points in the entire confrontation. If the United States or its allies want to squeeze Tehran economically, while also disrupting its ability to fund military operations, Karg Island becomes a critical node. But any effort linked to that island would be dangerous. To operate in that area, forces would likely have to work through waters and routes vulnerable to Iranian missiles, drones, maritime harassment, and other asymmetric threats. That is why the current U.S. buildup is so significant. The combination of Marines, airborne posture, and existing naval and air assets suggests Washington wants credible options tied to both leverage and contingency. Some analysts believe those troops are there mainly for support roles: embassy security, evacuation operations, force protection, and rapid crisis response. Others believe they are being positioned because airstrikes alone may not be enough to achieve the final strategic objectives. That is the larger debate now. Can the United States force a stable outcome from the air and sea alone? Or does lasting control require limited physical control over strategic terrain? Those in favor of stronger military action argue that bombing can destroy capability, but it cannot permanently deny geography. If you want to make sure Iran cannot continue using certain islands, launch points, or maritime positions to threaten the region, then at some point, someone may need to physically control them, even if only temporarily. Those who oppose escalation warn that the moment U.S. troops become directly tied to contested ground, the conflict enters a much more dangerous phase. And they are right to warn that. Because once boots are linked to territorial control, the risks multiply fast. American forces become clear targets. Iran gains propaganda opportunities. Regional actors are forced to pick sides, and the cost of miscalculation rises sharply. Still, that risk has not stopped the military buildup, and it has not stopped the regional realignment either. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are not moving closer to involvement because they want chaos. They are moving because the cost of absorbing attacks without decisive response may now seem even worse. At the same time, there is growing talk that a broader regional future could emerge if Iran's destabilizing role is reduced. That includes renewed discussion of expanded regional normalization and the wider strategic framework often associated with the Abraham Accords. In that sense, some see this crisis not only as a danger, but as an inflection point. A terrible one, but still an inflection point. If Iran's military leverage is cut down, if regional states become more coordinated, and if trade routes are secured, some believe a new strategic order could emerge. Others call that wishful thinking, because even if Iran is weakened, the structure of mistrust in the region remains deep. And that is exactly why negotiations are being viewed with so much skepticism. Many analysts simply do not trust Tehran's promises. They point to decades of deception, proxy violence, and evasive behavior on nuclear and missile issues. That is why even those open to a deal insist that military pressure cannot be relaxed too soon. Any agreement, they argue, would need inspections, enforcement, and continuing leverage. Not hope, not rhetoric. Not headlines. Real verification. Meanwhile, markets are trying to interpret all of this in real time. Oil prices move on every signal about Hormuz, troop deployments, possible pauses, and possible settlements. This is not just a financial side story. It is part of the war itself. Because when energy prices spike, every consumer feels the cost. Every importer feels the risk. Every government faces political pressure. That is one reason so much attention remains fixed on whether shipping can move safely through Hormuz and whether confidence can be restored. If the strait remains blocked or under credible threat, the wider world keeps paying. If it reopens securely, the temperature comes down. So where does this all leave us now? It leaves us in a moment where pressure is increasing on every front. The United States is building more military flexibility. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are moving closer to direct involvement. Iran's missile profile is becoming more alarming. The Strait of Hormuz remains the central pressure point. Strategic islands are being discussed as possible leverage points. Diplomacy is being mentioned, but trust is minimal. And the broader region is watching to see whether the next phase brings a deal, a wider coalition, or an even more dangerous escalation. This is why the current moment feels different, because it is no longer just about who struck whom. It is about what kind of Middle East emerges after this: a more stable one, a more militarized one, a more coalition-driven one, or a much more chaotic one. For now, the answer is not settled, but the warning signs are everywhere. The 82nd Airborne is moving closer. Saudi Arabia and the UAE are losing patience. Iran is showing missile capabilities that stretch beyond the old assumptions. And the world's most important energy choke point remains under pressure. That means the next moves will matter enormously. Because this could still become the final phase of coercive pressure that forces real concessions. Or it could become the opening stage of a much wider war, one that reaches across the Gulf, disrupts global markets, and redraws the military map of the region. And right now, the world is watching that decision unfold in real time.